On Monday afternoon, 29 October 1956, the Delta Wing supersonic B-58 moved for the first time under its own power. This occurred in a preliminary taxi maneuver which tested the braking characteristics, turning radius, and general overall ground handling characteristics of the B-58. To this date, the airplane had undergone an Air Force Safety Board inspection, ground vibration checks, engine runs to full military power, and numerous other checkouts, all of which proved its readiness for the taxi test phase of operation. The Convair flight crew for this number 1 B-58 is pilot B.A. Erickson, flight observer J.D. McEachern, and observer C.L. Harrison. Erickson, who also flew the first B-36 and YB-60, is manager of the flight department at Convair's Fort Worth Division. At approximately 16:30 hours, the B-58 with flight crew on board was pushed out of engine run station number 2 and towed to the starting position for the first taxi maneuver. Taxi screens were attached to the jets during this test to protect them against foreign object damage. The starting point for this test was the east-west taxi strip at the north end of the runway. The airplane was joined there by the ground support equipment and the fire trucks. Canopies were closed at approximately 1700 hours. Engines were started. And as darkness closed in, the B-58 moved onto the runway and underwent its first taxi maneuver. This test proved that the B-58's ground handling characteristics were excellent, and the airplane was given the green light to proceed with taxi runs. One week later, on 5 November 1956, the B-58 moved out of engine run station number 2 under its own power and made its second taxi run. This was a low-speed run made from north to south at approximately 40 knots. Excessive brake temperature, which developed in the aft inboard duals of the left main gear during the return taxi, caused a tire to blow after the airplane had come to a stop on the taxi strip. As soon as the wheel had cooled, ground crews came in to remove the tire and determine the cause of failure. Examination revealed that excessive temperature in the wheel was caused by a brake which didn't fully release. The tire change was completed in approximately 20 minutes, and the airplane was towed to the development hangar building for correction of the brake system discrepancy. The first high-speed taxi was made on Wednesday morning, 7 November, 1956. This run was made at a top speed of approximately 92 knots. The nose of the airplane was lifted to takeoff attitude for a very short time. Then power was cut and the drag chute deployed. There were no major discrepancies reported on this run. The second high-speed taxi was made after dark on 8 November, 1956. The entire weight of the aircraft was lifted from the landing gear on this run, which was made at 138 knots. On 10 November 1956, the B-58 made its third high-speed taxi. This run was made from north to south and reached a top speed of 148 knots. The only discrepancy encountered was a minor leak in the hydraulic system of the power control linkage package. On Sunday afternoon, 11 November 1956, while America celebrated Veterans Day, the B-58 taxied to the takeoff position for its first flight. Ground testing was now complete. Specifications have been met, and the B-58 was ready for its first flight. The weather for this occasion was perfect. Skies were clear, the air was mild, and there was a slight breeze from the south. Chase aircraft for this flight consisted of a Convair YF-102A, which was used for observation purposes, and an F-94C, which carried the aerial cameras. At approximately 14:39 hours, the chase planes released their brakes, cut in their afterburners, and took to the air. After holding just long enough for the chase airplanes to move into position, the B-58 released its brakes and began the takeoff roll. Afterburners were not used. The B-58 was airborne at exactly 14:41 hours after a ground roll of approximately 3,300 feet. Airspeed at takeoff was 160 knots. The takeoff was routine, and the climb was steady. Special flight data from the B-58 was telemetered back to a ground recording system in the Flight Test Department. This information was monitored throughout the flight and recorded for future study. Information obtained here is supplemented by other flight data recorded on board the airplane. Future flights will be covered in a similar manner. After takeoff, the B-58 with landing gear extended climbed to an altitude of 10,000 feet. The high landing gear is necessary so that the long fuselage can develop the ground angle required for takeoff and landing. Gear was retracted while the airplane was still at the 10,000-foot level. Operation was quick and smooth. Climb was then made to 20,000 feet, where the airplane was felt out at a speed of 0.7 Mach. At 15:19 hours, exactly 38 minutes after takeoff, the B-58 settled on the runway to successfully complete its flight. The drag chute was deployed immediately upon touchdown, and the airplane was brought to a short stop with a minimum amount of brake. The B-58 had come through its first flight with ease. Performance of engines and airplane had been routine. The B-58 supersonic bomber nosed into the engine run station at approximately 15:24 hours to conclude its first airborne excursion. The mechanical reactions of this airplane to its maiden flight are recorded on tape. But the reaction of the human element to the B-58 will be found on the faces of the crew. Of course, this is only the beginning. There will be many hours of grueling flight tests for the B-58 before it can be properly appraised as a weapon for the U.S. Air Force. But based on the first flight, it is reasonable to predict that the Convair supersonic B-58 will write a new chapter in America's mastery of the sky.
Swift, capable, versatile, operational. Morning on a SAC flight line. An ordinary day. B-58 bombers perched in an alert posture await the day's activities. An ordinary day. But what of the extraordinary day when the strength and swiftness of that striking arm is put to the ultimate test? The B-58 weapon system has passed through its share of extraordinary days. Days when its performance pushed over the historical markers of manned flight. 18 September 1959, Carswell Air Force Base, Texas. On this date, the B-58 proved its low-level assault capability and, in the process, racked up an unprecedented flight accomplishment. Flying at speeds on the edge of sound, the Hustler was never more than 500 feet above the terrain in its race across 4 states, from Texas to California. In strategic terms, what did the flight add up to? First, it verified prediction that high-speed, low-level strikes are feasible and without a sacrifice in B-58 high-altitude supersonic operations. In fact, just 1 week later, this same aircraft reaffirmed its high-altitude capability by racing from Seattle to Waco at an average speed of 20 miles a minute. Next, the on-the-deck flight to California meant that the enemy is vulnerable to one more mode of attack. By hugging the valleys and skimming mountaintops, the B-58 can sneak undetected beneath enemy radar nets and avoid missile installations, making line-of-sight retaliation extremely difficult. Unique low-level, high-speed capability, penetration at small risk, pulverizing striking power, maximum chance of survival. These are the sum of what the B-58 accomplished in a few hours, 18 September 1959. 22 November 1960, Holloman Test Range, New Mexico. The mission? To make a fully automatic weapon release at Mach 2, twice the speed of sound, from an altitude of 50,000 feet. The mission, climaxing a series of test drops, was successfully accomplished this day by a B-58 Hustler. Pod separation was clean. The drop away of the free fall bomb followed the calculated path. To the crew, all was routine. But it was one of the missions which gave Colonel James K. Johnson, commander of the 1st B-58 Wing, reason to say, we ought to get the best targets because we have the best airplane. 13 and 14 September 1960, Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas. The 13th marked the opening of the 1960 SAC combat competition. On its debut, the B-58 Hustler won for its 43rd Bomb Wing crew the High and Low-Level Bombing Award, the first bomber to win such an award so soon after becoming a part of SAC's inventory. With only 40 days of preparation, a lone B-58 and 2 crews competed against 24 other crack crews flying 12 other bombers which had many thousands of operational hours under their wings. The quick reaction capability of SAC's new weapon system was vividly displayed by the B-58 crew. They approached the plane, boarded, started engines, and got wheels rolling in 2 minutes, 10 seconds, half the time required for SAC's other operational bombers. And crews scored 200 out of a possible 200 points for this event. Using only one combat-ready B-58 for both missions, its 2 crews scored 1,046 points, 137 points behind the first-place winner. Accuracy on both radar bombing runs was much better than aircraft specification requirements. Crews scored 198 out of a possible 200 points in aerial refueling, on each occasion taking on 40,000 pounds in less than 8 minutes. The importance of this refueling capability using existing tankers is clearly apparent. It means that the Hustler is intercontinental in range, can strike SAC targets the world over from bases within the United States. Indeed, the performance of the B-58 constituted an overall demonstration under combat conditions of SAC's present mission capability. Although not competing in the events, Royal Air Force teams were on hand as official observers, pointing up the fact that the B-58 is the free world's only operational supersonic bomber. Air Marshal Sir Kenneth Cross, Commander-in-Chief, summed up his observations in this way.
I thought that one of the most remarkable aspects of the competition was the success of the B-58. Whatever advantages they had in equipment, it surely must be unique for the first time in the competition to come out with the best bombing result.
12 January 1961, Edwards Air Force Base, California. 6 new world speed records for payload and no payload flights were established by one SAC B-58 bomber in one flight, carrying a 4,000-pound payload. 5 of these records were held by the Soviet Union. The record-breaking flight was under the supervision of the National Aeronautic Association, which forwards certification data to the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, Paris, France. NAA observers were at each turning point where official sighting stations were set up to make sure that the bomber, which reached a maximum ground speed of 1,425 miles per hour, did not cut inside the pylons on turns and thus shorten the required course distance. This run was to assault the 2,000-kilometer record, 2 laps around the track with a payload of 2,000 kilograms, about 4,000 pounds. The B-58's 3-man crew were the following: Major Henry J. Dutchendorf, pilot, Captain William L. Polhamus, navigator bombardier, and Captain R.R. Wagoner, defense systems operator, all officers of the 65th Squadron of the 43rd, the Air Force's first B-58 bomb wing at Carswell Air Force Base, Fort Worth, Texas. Standing by to monitor the flight path were the crew's commanding general, Major General Nils Oman, commander of the 19th Air Division of the 2nd Air Force, and their commanding officer, Colonel James K. Johnson. Chase planes carrying NAA observers could keep up with the Mach 2 B-58 only for short stretches. Heavy reliance was placed on ground observers and tracking cameras for certification data. Even the tracking radar was pushed to the fullest to keep up. As it crossed the starting line, NAA officials timed it and watched its climb to altitude. Altitude is checked by onboard barographs, NAA officials in observation planes, and tracking cameras. 1,061 miles an hour was the average speed, establishing 3 new world's records for the 2,000-kilometer run, 2 laps around the 1,000-kilo course. The speed on the second lap, 1,200 miles per hour for 1,000 kilometers, established 3 more new world's records. General Thomas Power at SAC's headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska said, "The major significance of these B-58 record flights is that they have dramatically proved the capabilities of SAC's first operational supersonic bomber." 14 January 1961, Edwards Air Force Base, California. An Air Force B-58 Hustler today broke 3 of the 6 world speed records set only 2 days earlier by another B-58. Major Harold E. Confer was pilot, and his crew, officers at the 43rd Bomb Wing, were Major Richard H. Weir, Navigator Bombardier, Captain Harold S. Bialas, Defense Systems Operator. Today's records, like those on January the 12th, were set with the aircraft in an uphill climb. Major Confer's plane crossed the starting line at 40,000 feet and finished at 50,000. The flight required him to make a 185-degree turn over NAA-monitored pylons, maintaining a 60-degree bank angle throughout the turn and pulling more than 2 Gs, twice the force of gravity. From the ground, its turn looked razor-sharp, cutting the pylon close and clean. The least cut inside the crosshair would have aborted the mission. Major Confer's crew closed the 1,000-kilometer course with an average of 1,284 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles an hour faster than the B-58 record set 2 days earlier. Today is now. As scheduled, 2 B-58s left Edwards Air Force Base after their week of record-breaking high-speed runs to return home to Carswell Air Force Base. On the way, they flew simulated missions. Major Richard Weir, Navigator Bombardier of the Roadrunner, got a shack, a direct hit, on a practice bombing run. Captain Bill Polhamus of the Untouchable turned in a score that was well within aircraft specifications. Not an ordinary day, not an extraordinary day for these B-58s, but a special one certainly for their crews. A homecoming welcome. Today, the story at Carswell Air Force Base is that the first wing of the world's first supersonic bomber is operational, willing, able, ready. This was stated forcefully by General Keith K. Compton, SAC's Deputy Director of Operations, at the close of the 1960 combat competition.
The superb bombing of the B-58 force in this competition definitely proves that the SAC now possesses a positive supersonic bombing competition capability. This competition has proven beyond a doubt that this weapon system is a potent, alert vehicle with a positive, accurate striking power.